I do know we're recording.
Hoorah.
Okay, because we're recording because some people are not listening today. Do you want to do prayers?
Yeah, I tell you guys that this is funny. We have 4 people here today, and I'm really kind of like feeling good about that. When we flooded that time, there was one Sunday we never missed, but there was one, we only had one person, and he sat about 3 feet in front of us right there, and that was the whole thing. So 4 is doing pretty good. But I told you, I don't like to sermonize, but as this thing gets closer to land, we start remembering, to pray for people and everything. I did not hear those calls when it was approaching the Yucatan or when it was approaching Jamaica. It's kind of a funny thing. You want to keep that. Pray for all the people like us probably doesn't live up to who we're supposed to be. But we do. This is where we are now. And I hope this isn't somebody telling me they can't hear me. But we are concerned, and we have a whole lot of people who are anxious. No. Okay. Alton and Kathy. Kathy is online. We remember them every week, and I hope in between. It's difficult, and to be in that position with this storm coming in is difficult. Remember them, and the same with Phil and Cherie. Jim Allen, we got some.
I think he's waiting for radiation, and Robin, I know, left town yesterday, so I didn't have an update on.
But he got to take his last round of chemo, and now he's waiting to start the radiation. Kelly is not with us.
No.
Her pain remains, and it's personal to me because mine has come back. And so when it comes to pain, keep her in mind in your prayers. And of course, our Julie got her new medicine. She has begun taking it. We haven't seen any results from it yet, but
not expected to until
not expected to for another few weeks. The people that are so affected by this storm, the worry, the anxiety, and so many people here went through it not many years ago. It's easy to look at a giant storm and say, well, there's nothing we can do, or all we can do is pray. That all we can do is kind of a letdown too. Remember to have your conversations with God during times like this.
Oh, and think of Cindy Deck and Paula Dean. They are out of town taking care of Paula Dean's sorority sister who just had major cancer surgery, and they're in Chicago. And I am sure they are very worried today. They have a house on Key Allegro with storm surge, and they lost 3 houses during Harvey. So Macaulay's here, and probably Bill. So they're probably taking care of the house. But I am sure, being away doesn't make it any easier.
If ever there were 2 people that could justify saying we can't do anything for anyone else, they're in that position. But there they are. They're helping out. Not Paula's sorority sister, who's so that's what we do. That's kind of what we expect. God, we always remember to come thankful, but some days are more difficult than others. This storm seems so large and unstoppable, and yet we see your mercy in this world around us. There are those that are in harm's way. There are those that are anxious about what's going on. And our prayers are to remind them, for them to feel your hand in this and know that there are others like us out there that keep them in the prayers. We know that it matters. These ones that we've mentioned who are ill, we continue to be bold enough to lift them up, to say, we ask for your hand. It gets more difficult when they're also facing these storms. We're We ask for your hand on them and on lives and on hearts. Remember to be with us as we study these things, that they bring us the understanding to draw close to you when these things, to trust when the logical thing is that there is no help. Be with us while we study. Amen. Why am I hearing?
Oh, it's because we're getting another, sorry, turn on
Go
the
ahead.
phone. Yeah,
And I'll turn it off.
yeah, we're getting another code red. Okay, where did we leave off? We are, remember, studying the women in the Old Testament, and we have studied Deborah, and then we studied Rahab, and we're studying Ruth. We're on the last day of our study of Ruth, and next week we're going to start our last study of women in the Old Testament, and we're going to look at Esther. But so where are we with Ruth? Where do we leave off? Remember, Ruth was alive either 1,000, 1,100 years before Jesus was born, to give you some context. Ruth is a Moabite. She is a widow. She had just, quote unquote, or air quotes, proposed to Boaz, who is a kinsman redeemer, and she is waiting to see what will happen. I thought about that this morning as we wait to see about a storm. Here is Ruth waiting to see if Boaz is going to be her kinsman redeemer, or and is going to help her and Naomi. And remember, all of this is pointing back to, if we ever have a study that helps you understand what Romans 8 verse 28 means, it's this. And so remember, Romans 8:28 is, we know that God works all things together for good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. Your turn.
Okay, so this week finally is the payoff for me on some of this. Sometimes when we go through these studies, I'll mention a thing and I get questions or I get those sideways looks. And it's because I've already read through to the end. This is where some of the things I've been telling you, and we don't like to skip around. We kind of like to take it in order. So you're going to see the reason why some of the things we said, we felt pretty confident in, because they're cleared up in the last chapter. One thing I do want to kind of mention is, it seems like it's almost a hobby for people when they talk about Ruth coming to Boaz on the threshing floor, that she's done something wrong, that this, it just is just not. I want you to look, remember how this story was told. They went to great lengths to tell you what kind of a person Ruth is, right? And then they go to great lengths to tell you what kind of a person Boaz is. When he comes up, he greets his workers with, "May the Lord bless you." He is one of those guys that is righteous. And so to think, to even speculate that this incident happens on the threshing floor and suddenly they throw all that away. When we got to take our honeymoon a year after we got married. We went to Belize, and on the island we went to, the story is, there's no crime there other than what you bring with you. All right. This is one of those same sort of things. If you're seeing something in that threshing floor incident that looks untoward, that looks wrong, you brought it with you, because the story doesn't say that. The story doesn't even end it. If anything, it tells us the exact opposite about these people. So we'll keep that in mind. And then the idea that we said last week, Boaz sends Ruth home early. It's still dark, and that way nobody knows she's been there, because people love to talk. But he also tells her to bring out her shawl and loads her up.
We haven't read that yet.
We haven't read that yet?
Nope.
See, this is the other problem, is that we study this thing so much. I feel like I've been through it already. Okay.
That's where we are.
All right.
Okay. So we are at Ruth 3, verse 14. Then Boaz said, "Do not let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." And he told her, "Bring your shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, she shoveled 6 measures of barley into her shawl. Then he went into the city,
Go ahead.
and that's where I was gonna say.
Somebody else is
Yeah.
trying to get in there.
There
We
you
go.
go. Okay.
Yeah, so what we've been telling you is that Naomi sees this, we think, sort of going on between Ruth and Boaz, and she sends her out. But if Boaz is who we think he is, it also means that Naomi is going to be taken care of. If Naomi meets another husband, he's under no obligation to also take care of Naomi. Boaz sends, he's already given Ruth a bunch of grain, remember? She went home with 22 pounds or something, but he says, bring your shawl. And this time the grain is already threshed. It's just grain. And he sends her home with, 40 pounds.
6 measures of barley, which they think is 50 pounds of barley.
It depends on who you
Yeah.
talk to. It's a lot. But he sends it home. He says, I don't want you going home to your mother-in-law empty-handed. He sees that Naomi's involved in this too. And he's also sending her a message. Don't worry, when this is over with, Naomi, you're going to be taken care of as well. He specifically says that I don't want you going home to your mother-in-law empty-handed. You need to say, this is a message for her as much as it's a message for Ruth. And there's also nothing wrong with that. I've told you that the idea of arranged marriages is really a thing within, and especially back then, it was a thing. So the fact that Naomi is sort of negotiating this, it's more than accepted. It's more than acceptable. It is odd in that the father would normally make the arrangements, not the mother-in-law. It's a little dicey for the woman to be making the advances, but that's tradition. It's not law, right? So if any of this seems like somebody has stepped over the line, they really haven't. It's actually a beautiful thing.
There's no father.
There is no father. And Gene, I might have remembered to get to that, and I might not. But there is part of that is a point here. We have these laws and customs, and there's a lot more custom than there is even a law. But they're also, I told you the Jews are very pragmatic people. And in this case, what choice does Ruth have? Does it somehow upset the law for this to be done this way? It really has more to do with expectations. We've told you before, we have the law in the Old Testament, and then there's what's known as the Midrash. And the Midrash are the oral teachings from the rabbis. Within the Midrash, you have different rabbis who say things that are absolutely opposite, 180 degrees opposite from each other, and yet both things are treated as authoritative. And we, being Westerners, we look at that and go, well, that's just the dumbest thing ever. But what I'm trying to tell you is that some of the stuff that seems odd to us is not that odd to them. And I'm not saying that you put aside the law, but a lot of the things that are treated as law are custom. The people have sort of added to, and when it's necessary, how many, here's one more, and I know this is a sidetrack, but how many times when we've done these studies, have you seen within the lineage of Jesus that the oldest son doesn't inherit, right? It happens over and over again. And they have very strict rules about that, except when they don't. And we struggle with it. We want a cookbook that tells us exactly how to live. And this is an example of one of those things. If the people had known she was there, they would have told stories. But it doesn't mean that they did something wrong with her being there. Try and keep that in mind.
I put a note here, and I don't even remember. It says something about Art Linkletter example.
Oh, let's not do that.
Okay. Verse.
it is the Almighty's hand working it.
Absolutely. That it's it's like we say about the scriptures that they are inspired, that the law itself is not the problem. It's what we do with the law. It's that we set ourselves up as if now I have the right to go judging other people over things. And this I just think is a good example. Ruth doesn't have a father to negotiate, so Naomi takes up the slack, and it's a good thing.
Verse 16. When Ruth returned to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked her, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then Ruth told her all that Boaz had done for her. And she said, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, 'Do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" "Wait, my daughter," said Naomi, "until you find out how things go, for he will not rest until he has resolved the matter today."
And imagine being Ruth and putting yourself on the line. I mean, this is a risky thing to do. You got to admit, making yourself that vulnerable, that out on a limb. And then you have to wait to see what Boaz is going to do, right? I mean, he might say, I've thought about it. I don't mind giving you some grain, but this marriage thing, probably not. I mean, it's got to be tense. Naomi knows, I have no doubt she's been watching this go on. And you're going to see why when we get to chapter 4. But Naomi just tells Ruth, look, calm down. It's going to be okay. And she knows what kind of a man Boaz is. She says, I'm telling you, he's not going to rest until this is solved. And he's going to have that done before this day is out. So just sit back and wait and see what happens. Have a little faith.
Chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz went to the gate and sat down there. Soon the kinsman redeemer of whom he had spoken came along and Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down.
This is one of my favorites. If you've been tuned out for a minute, tune back in. So the business is done at the city gate. And elders, people come there, but if you got business to do, that's where you go. Boaz, this threshing floor thing happened that early that morning, right? I mean,
Midnight,
it's just,
yeah.
well, yeah, but she
Yeah.
leaves with the
Early
grain
morning, yeah.
just before daylight. That morning, he's at the city gates. And remember, he said there's another kinsman redeemer. There's another relative who's a closer relative than me who has the right to redeem. And so I have to go through the proper channels. But he shows up at the gate and he sees, coincidentally, once again, it just happens that the redeemer that he's looking for is there at the gate. Another amazing coincidence in this. What I want you to remember, though, this is not supposed to be a transcript of the conversation between Boaz and this guy. Remember, this was told orally for hundreds of years before it gets written down. This is someone telling the story about the conversation. So what I want you to see, look at this. This is right at the very beginning. He says, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." Okay? Where it says "my friend," that's a Hebrew term, which is Peloni Almoni. And it's a little sing-song, kind of a rhymey thing. It literally means so-and-so or such and such. We said from chapter 1, names are a big deal in this. We don't know who this other closer relative is. They literally, in the Hebrew text, call him so-and-so. Do you remember when David is running from Saul and he's starving and he goes to the high priest, he's out, and he wants some bread. And the high priest says, sort of panics. He says, "What are you doing here alone?" And David tells him, "Oh, my king has put me on a secret mission. And he told me, don't tell anybody. And so I have instructed my young men to meet me at a certain place." Same word, same phrase. Peloni Almoni, right? Such and such place. And that's David saying, I can't tell you, it's a secret. So I've told my young men to wait for me at a place that I'm not telling you about. This guy is anonymous. And you think, well, maybe it's because it just isn't important. On the other hand, as you're going to see, the other guy has a chance to be the redeemer and declines. And so it may be he's not named because that could be sort of shameful. And so this is not a story about him. It's a story about Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. And so the other redeemer is just referred to as so-and-so. I just think that's very cool and they translate it as my friend, because obviously Boaz wouldn't have said, hey, so-and-so, come over here and sit down. Boaz would have called him by name. This is the story about the conversation, not the conversation.
What I'm interested in is this no-name redeemer.
Yeah.
That may be higher in the inheritance bloodline from Jesus, which is what we're talking about here. From where? From what side? Mother?
This
Father?
other redeemer,
Yeah,
it says he's from the clan of Elimelech.
So it would
it's the
be-
same clan.
Yeah.
Both of them are from the same clan.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. They're
So it's a cousin and a cousin, or I mean, that would be the thought, right?
Yep. Yep. And we're gonna talk a little more about that in a minute, though. So
Verse 2. Then Boaz took 10 of the elders of the city and said, sit here. And they did so. And he said to the kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has returned from the land of Moab, is selling a piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should inform you that you may buy it back in the presence of those seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you want to redeem it, do so. But if you will not redeem it, tell me, so I may know, because there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am next after you.
okay. So first thing you want to see is Boaz is doing everything by the book. He goes to the city gate where business is transacted. He finds the other redeemer, the closer relative, and says, hey, come over, have a seat. And he's going to propose some kind of business because that's what's going on. And then he gathers 10 elders. Now, within Judaism, there's something called a minyan. That's Minyan. And you go, like, for instance, if on the death of a parent, you go to the synagogue or the temple, if you're close enough to the temple, and you every day you sit and you pray with 10 men, a minyan. For a lot of their ceremonies, for a lot of their feast kind of things, for it to be official, to be kicked off, it requires a minyan. It requires 10 men. So this is both symbolic, but it's also very legal. Boaz is making sure that when he does what he's about to do, nobody has a legal claim anymore. He's doing everything by the book. And so he calls the 10 elders over, and they're witnesses. So you transact this oral contract in front of 10 elders, 10 well thought of men. It becomes binding. Boaz is, pretty neat guy for doing this way. If he had just popped up and said, you know what, Ruth, I agree, let's get married, and he leaves this other thing hanging out there, this other guy could come along and say, hey, you cheated me, and I demand that you turn all this over to me. So Boaz goes the proper route, and you see what he does. He says that Naomi is selling a piece of land. We tried to talk about that. The rules on all of this inheritance for women are nuts. The main thing you have to understand is that this land is going to be transferred, and the Redeemer has the ability to pay whatever the purchase price and keep it for himself, keep it in the family. The idea is to keep the land in the family. So he tells this guy that, he says, this land is going to change hands, And I thought I should tell you that you have the right to redeem it. Now, I was hoping Mario would be here because last week he said, how is it that if Naomi knows all the customs, she didn't know that there was a closer relative, that there was a closer redeemer, right?
She did. I thought she did too.
It never says that. In fact, it doesn't even hint at that. Boaz is the one who tells Ruth, I get you, but there's another closer kinsman redeemer, and I've got to present it to him first. There's no evidence. There's nothing that says Naomi knew about that, right? I told you that Naomi has been kind of going behind the scenes. What this should tell you is Boaz has been doing his homework too. Boaz didn't have to hesitate about what the next step would be. And he obviously had researched the genealogy to come up with it's not something you just automatically know about every human that lives in the area, about every Jew. So Boaz has done his homework. So I think it very clearly is supposed to show us he's been thinking about this himself. So the moment Ruth presents herself, Boaz knows what to do. And he knows about
Because this is, like you said, this is hours later. That was probably, the sun comes up 6 o'clock in the morning, and this is in the morning, later in the morning. It's 4 hours later. He knew what to do.
This is literally just a few hours after he sent Naomi home with that grain. Yes.
Is there actual land, or is he referring to it as his property as a Ruth?
I should have given you a microphone, but I'll repeat that. She says, is there actual land, or is he talking about the property being Ruth? And it's a good question, and we don't really know. We suspect that there's some land involved, and I'll tell you why, because we're gonna get to that. Because when he says, if he tells this guy, he says, look, you have the right of first refusal. If you don't want to do it, let me know, so I'll do it. There's nobody closer than you, so it's your choice. And then after you comes me. Well, he's just made it clear he thinks it's a good deal. He's after this redemption. And so the other guy immediately says,
I will redeem it, he replied.
yep, that's the deal. Boaz made it look like he was chomping at the bit, and all he needs is this guy to say, I'm going to pass. And the other guy says, if you want it, I know I want it. So he says, sure, I'll redeem it. Watch how Boaz works this situation.
Verse 5, then Boaz says, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and also from Ruth the Moabitess, you must also acquire the widow of the deceased in order to raise up the name of the deceased of his inheritance. The kinsman redeemer replied, I cannot redeem it myself, or I would jeopardize my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption, because I cannot redeem it.
That's good. Yeah, with the baggage, beautifully said. That's exactly right. So it indicates there is land involved. There's something that would benefit Boaz and would benefit this other redeemer. But Boaz stands up and says, oh yeah, I know.
By the way,
I just gave you that choice, and you said, oh, but before you go through with it, you might want to know that at the same time you redeem the land, you're going to need to redeem the widow, Ruth, and raise up an heir to her dead ex-husband, Malon, right? And you see how complicated this gets, because this is levirate marriage, and now you have someone born to this other man, right? But it technically is the son of Malon, of her dead husband. And you think that's going to complicate inheritance a little bit? It certainly could. And we don't know the whole situation. All we know is that Boaz manipulated this, and the guy immediately snapped and said, now it's become something that's going to get settled today in front of all these people. Technically, the guy doesn't have to redeem Ruth, but Boaz does it in front of all these people. And you see the guy would look very small if he doesn't agree to do this for the dead husband, to raise up that line. Boaz manipulates this. He does. Jane, you're giving me a skeptical look, but this is absolutely, because what happens if this guy finds out that he could redeem the land? And Boaz says, yeah, but you got to take Ruth. The guy goes away and says, let me think about it for a couple of days. And he goes to see an attorney, and the attorney says, technically, you don't have to redeem Ruth. And now all of a sudden, this whole thing falls apart. I think it's clear that what we're supposed to see is that Boaz gave this a lot of thought. And he sets the guy, he says, look, and he does. If he wants to redeem the land, he gets to, he's the first, in line. But because Ruth is there and the guy can't say, oh yeah, no, I just want the land. I don't want to raise up the house of Elimelech's dead son, of her dead husband. I don't want to participate in that. I just want the land. Think how he would look. So Boaz does it in front of all of these witnesses. And the guy says, I would do it, but that's going to complicate my own inheritance.
And we've already been
You do
told through this whole story. I mean, because as you said, this is a story that's been set up. Who was Boaz? Boaz, remember, they came back from Moab after this horrible drought. And Boaz was a successful man. I mean, Boaz, even, you can assume that the drought was over, but he survived the drought and was a very successful businessman. I mean, Boaz is no fool.
No. That's you got to be in that culture. You got to be a smart operator to be that successful.
But my frown is Boaz's statement is incorrect, legally incorrect to this prospective redeemer.
And he doesn't say it's the law.
I'm sorry?
He doesn't say the law says, but he sets the man up. He does
It's
it
the
in front
right,
of these people.
and it's the right
He
thing
tells
to
him
do.
it's the right thing to do.
My point is maybe a white lie or not, but my point is that's not in character with Boaz. He's been an honorable man.
Oh, but
He's played by
all
the
he's saying,
rules.
he's saying it is the right thing to do. I mean, Boaz is saying, yes, you can redeem the land. He never says it's a legal thing, but he says it is the ethical thing to do for you to take Ruth as your wife. And if you have a son, then that son is actually
Gene,
Milan's.
I tell you a lot that,
Did they charge
when
you for
dealing
it?
with the Jews, nothing is cut and dry. Nothing is black and
They just
white.
forgot to give it to you.
The fact is, Cheryl.
So in sales, you present the part of the package you want to.
Well,
the
yeah.
other person to see. There's many layers to the package, but you're presenting.
But Gene has a point, though. He has a point, and I hear what you're saying. The fact is, if you want to get hyper legal, it's a requirement that you raise up a son to keep the dead husband's line going. They've watered it down. It's the same thing with divorce. They're not supposed to get divorced. Jesus has a long thing about that dealing with the Pharisees. He says, you guys were weak and you talked Moses into saying that it's okay to put aside your wife. That was never the law, but you made it the law by just custom, right? So what he's saying is, if you really want to get down to it, it is what the guy is supposed to do, but they don't honor that like they should. So the big thing I can tell you, if it looks like trickery and that offends you, in the Middle East, well, for one thing, even when we were there, you go buy a thing of bread, the vendor's going to cheat you. He just is. If you're a stupid American, he's going to get an extra few shekels from you. And I always laughed. I said, by the end of a lifetime, they'll be hundreds of dollars ahead, but they're constantly nickel and diming. And it is the culture. They're legends, like in the Arab communities, they have some leader that it's like Paul Bunyan, we have Paul Bunyan. Well, they have some leader that tricked another leader out of his fortune. They sit down and the next thing you know, the guy goes home without his chest full of rubies. It's different for them than it is for us. And we're not well equipped to deal with all this. What I am showing you, though, is that Boaz sets this scenario up so that the other guy in front of all these witnesses would have to say, yeah, I don't really want to do right by the widow. And he can't. And he says, I'd like to redeem it, but when you put it that way, I'm going to have to pass. Boaz, you take my right of redemption. You're number two. That is what happens.
But that's the second half of the story. How is this prospective redeemer saying, I'd love to do it, guys, but I can't because it would hurt my inheritance?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And that is why this custom has developed, that it's not really law. You don't really have to do the redemption and of the widow. You don't have to raise up a son. We don't always, if someone wants to, we'll let them, but they aren't enforcing it. So Boaz has to do this in front of witnesses. And what I'm trying to get across is not hyper legal. I want you to see the beauty of this, that Boaz has every intention of making sure that Ruth becomes his wife and that he takes care of Naomi. This is his intention. Everything else, we can split hairs, but what you're supposed to see from this is that Boaz is a good guy. And Boaz gave his word to Ruth, and now he's keeping it.
Verse 7. Now in former times in Israel, concerning the redemption or exchange of property, to make any matter legally binding, a man would remove his sandal and give it to the other party. And this was a confirmation in Israel. So the kinsman redeemer removed his sandal and said to Boaz, buy it for yourself.
This is how, the tradition on how contract, because what you don't want is to have somebody say, do we have a deal? And the other guy goes, sure, we have a deal. And then come back later and say, well, I didn't mean that deal. I didn't mean right then. We have a deal. So you want to get it tied down. This handing of the shoe in the Middle East today, right now, if you throw your shoe at someone, it's the sign of utmost disrespect. They were doing a press conference in the Middle East, and a reporter threw his shoe at George W. Bush. And it's a scandal in the Middle East. You don't do that. That's showing contempt. So these things that they have, we don't always understand, but the story tells you that in order to make a contract like this really binding, one person hands his sandal over to the other one. It was just there. It's like having your name on a piece of paper. This says to everybody, I agree. And if the other guy takes the sandal, both parties, this is a legal binding contract. That's what we're being told.
At this, Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses today that I am buying from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, Chilion, and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, to raise up the name of the deceased through his inheritance, so that his name will not disappear from among his brothers or from the gate of his home. You are witnesses today.
And again, I hope you see the beauty in this, because he makes it clear in front of these same witnesses, I'm not just redeeming the land, I'm taking Ruth as my wife, right? He's not redeeming the land, and he's taking her as his wife, and he says it in front, as this expression goes, in front of God and everybody, right? And if this hadn't been done by the book, people would have talked. You never, in small towns, you never outlive some things, but they all have such a reputation. And so what Boaz says is, I'm not only taking her for my wife, but I'm pledging in front of all of you that I'm going to give her a son that will become the heir of her dead husband. This is the real law, if you will, on this sort of levirate marriage. And so he makes it, this is a gesture in front of these people so that everything is on the up and up. So that he says, look, I know she's a Moabite living among us, but she's going to be one of us. And we're doing this according to Jewish law. We're doing this according to Jewish customs, and we're doing everything the right way. And it pays off. This is another sign of what kind of a guy Boaz is, because he set this up and then he makes this big declaration so that there's no doubt about where this stands. And that sort of, I don't want to say sanitizes Ruth, but she's still an outsider, okay? But not anymore. This ceremony that Boaz does, she's now, nobody can deny that she's now taken in and she's one of them, okay? And what I hope I can communicate is what an incredible thing this is that Boaz does, and the effect that it has generation after generation from the descendants.
Verse 11, we are witnesses, said the elders and all the people at the gate. May the Lord make the woman entering your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you be prosperous in Ephrath and famous in Bethlehem. And may your house become like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman.
Okay, so remember at this point, there's no hint of a King David. Yes, David comes down. He's like the grandson. And when Boaz announces he's gonna take Ruth as his wife, he's gonna raise up the heir, everybody says, "Wow! I mean, this is a great thing." And it's may your wife, may Ruth, be like, who'd you say, Rachel and Leah? Rachel and Leah, who enhanced the house of the line of Judah. In other words, may you have a lot of children and grandchildren through this. Do you see how important that is in the culture? That the idea is to build up the line of Judah. So may you have lots of children. And then they bring up Perez, right? Perez was the son of Tamar. He's an ancestor. Okay. Tamar had this same situation. She married a man and he died. And the father gave the next son in line to Tamar to be her husband, to raise up the line of the dead brother. And he died. And then the next one, and I'm sorry, it's a rough world. But finally, the guy's down to one son. And he says, this woman's unlucky, clearly. Something ain't right here. I'm not giving my last son to her. Besides, he's just a kid. But I'm just not doing it. And that was shameful. At that time, they're still enforcing the law. And it was shameful. But he says, I don't care if it's shameful. I'm not giving up my last son. So here's Tamar. She goes and disguises herself as a prostitute, right? And entices the father-in-law. She actually sleeps with her father-in-law, pretending to be a prostitute, and conceives a son whose name is Perez. They're actually a pair of twins, but the oldest one is Perez. This is mentioned here. And they said, this is a great thing you're doing. May you be blessed, and may they have luck, and may it work out as well as it did with that Tamar woman. Remember the one who tricked her father-in-law and everything? And Perez becomes one of the important people in the lineage. So may this thing with this Moabite woman, whatever this is, may it work out just as well as that deal with Tamar and her father-in-law way back there. You see how they aren't letting go of this? All right. If Boaz doesn't, this is what I'm telling you. A lot of the time I'll say things because I know how it comes out. Boaz goes to these lengths.
But I have to think when you're sitting there, I mean, are these people being nice or are these people being mean?
Catty. Being a little catty, maybe. Aren't we human after all? But Boaz does a beautiful thing. He does a mitzvah by Ruth and Naomi. In doing it this way, it becomes normal.
And as you do your imitations of Jewish women, you can just see him sitting there thinking, well, I guess it worked out for them. Look what a mess Tamar had, and it worked out.
Tamar became prostitute, and she's in the line, I guess, if this Moabite woman has been, if Boaz wants her, it could be all right. And so not only that, may you be blessed. Yes, James.
But I think they missed the point of the reading that God takes control and is good for the right people.
It is baked into this story in so many places. All of these coincidences, the work of a righteous man that works something together for good. It's through their faith. With Ruth, it's her faith when she comes back and she says, "Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." Through the whole thing, and this is we're getting right at the end. I want you to hopefully to understand that this story gets told for thousands of years because of that, because we see the work of a righteous man, because we see the faith of a Moabite woman being transformative, that it's this idea that because she's an outsider and a Moabite, she's unacceptable to God. And yet so we're supposed to see God's hand in this, and we do in fact see it. It is maybe a little more subtle. It's why I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that this thing is told at the campfires. This is told at the beginning of, the festivals, the story of Ruth, to keep it alive. So this, does it come right out? If you were telling this to an audience, maybe you would. I want you to remember that God's hand was in all of this, maybe. Or maybe you just tell the story and you let them see God's hand, because there are clues everywhere, especially the coincidences. And it just happens the very next morning, this closer kinsman redeemer was right coming through the gates. What are the odds of that? You're absolutely correct, Gene. I don't think they missed the point. I think that we tend to. I think that we tend to look at this story and forget to say God's hand is in this. We did a study one time, and that was in James, where he tells people, new believers, don't say, "I'm going to go to this city and do business and make a lot of money." Always remember to say, if God's willing, this is what I'm going to do. Gene, you have been one of the best about remembering that lesson. You remind me of it, that sometimes we say, well, this is my plan, so that's what's going to happen. And not to remember to say, if God wills it. So it's in there, it's baked in. And in fact, I want you to read the next part.
So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he had relations with her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son.
Way back in chapter 1, I told you to pay close attention to something, because it indicated that Naomi heard, when they were living in Moab, that God had
Here it is. It's Ruth 1:6. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had attended to his people by providing them with food, she and her daughter-in-law prepared to leave the land of Moab.
Don't go away from this without, I told you then, remember, pay attention to this part. She heard that the Lord had given food to his people. He doesn't say that the famine was over. This story recognizes God's hand in this. And here at the very end, it says that Ruth became his wife, and when he had relations with her, the Lord allowed her to conceive. That's a beautiful thing. That's remembering to acknowledge the fact that God has had his hand in this. And Gene, it's baked into the story. It's there.
As you said, they could have easily said, she became his wife, and when they had relations with her, she gave birth to a son.
She conceived her, she gave birth to a son. And that would have been enough to tell the story, but not this story. Because this story is that God enabled her to conceive. It doesn't shortchange that throughout this whole thing.
Verse 14. Then the women said to Naomi, "Bless the Lord, who has not left you this day without a kinsman redeemer. May his name become famous in Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. And Naomi took the child, placed her on her lap, and became a nurse to him. The neighbor women said, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David.
And so the women, after Ruth has this child, look at what they say. Blessed is the Lord who hasn't left you, Naomi, hasn't left you without a kinsman redeemer. And this is where we get into this thing about the kinsman redeemer. Technically, they're supposed to do it. But there was a good chance that nobody steps up. Whether they're a relative or not, nobody steps up. And Naomi is left on her own. And, it's a hard, hard life. And so they acknowledge God. Blessed be the Lord who hasn't left you without a kinsman redeemer, who provided for you. It's baked into the story. God's hand in all of this. And it says, the weird thing is, it says, a son has been born to Naomi. And this hangs people up. And it also says that they give the baby to Naomi and she becomes a nurse. This is not a wet nurse. This is not like Moses' mother going and becoming the wet nurse for Moses living in the house. It's not like that. That word literally is just a caretaker. Somewhere where they put it in the English, they said nurse. They didn't know we were going to interpret it that way. We were going to take it that way. But what it does say here, once again, pay attention to what the story is telling us. Naomi becomes part of the household. That's what you're supposed to see. Naomi is there as a caretaker to help raise the child. That means that Boaz has fully taken her in and she gets to be there with that grandbaby every single day. That's what this story is there to show us. Boaz has fully taken Naomi into the household and she becomes, caretaker. When it says the child has been born to Naomi, nobody believes that somehow this is Naomi's child, but it is Naomi's redemption. It is
her bloodline.
It is the bloodline of her dead husband. It's the bloodline of her dead son, and it's the thing that provides for her in her old age. And so, in a very real sense, this miracle of this child, God's provided for Naomi. That's what they're telling us with this story, and it's a beautiful thing. The women name the child Obed, right? The father gets to decide that. When John the baptizer, John was born, and remember his father couldn't speak. And so the women are all getting together saying, oh, you've got an uncle named Shlomo, you should name him Shlomo. Well, no, we can do better than that. And the women are they're going to name him. And Zechariah comes up with a tablet and he says, his name is John. The father has that right. We only see a couple of times where other people wind up naming the child. But in this case, this child is like a community event. And they get together and the women ooh and ah, and they even name the child, and Boaz puts up with it. You see a picture here of this community, of this redemption being full and complete. And it's beautiful.
And I'm going to have you read the last verse so I don't fill every one of those names.
All right, this is just part of the lineage. And this begins with them. It says the very end that the child Obed became the father of Jesse, the father of David. And we know from the histories that King David's dad was named Jesse and his father was named Obed. I mean, these are historically accurate people. And as the Jews like to do, they go down a part of the lineage. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Remember who Perez is? Perez is the son of Tamar, who became a prostitute for the same sort of elaborate marriage, right? These are the generations of Perez, the son of Tamar. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nashon. Nashon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. And Jesse was the father of David. When it comes to the law, and you know, Gene, you hit me with it periodically, and I understand why. Theory and reality. They have, within the law, within the custom, the oldest son inherits the name, right? The oldest son inherits the bulk of the stuff. Not all of it, but the bulk, right? And yet we see in the line of Jesus a number of times, you know, you think about Jacob and Esau. Jacob was the younger, and yet he winds up getting the birthright. And this is in Jesus, you know, line. And we see even with Joseph's sons, Joseph is off in Egypt, and we see that one of his sons literally becomes counted as one of the 12. A tribe is named after him. One of the other ones who did something really shameful just gets sort of kicked out. Now that's backwards to us for the law. I mean, the law is the law, right? The law is rigid. That's what the Pharisees love to say. The law is rigid. And yet we see the law getting, you know, modified even in the line of the Messiah. And we see this woman who becomes a prostitute. That's one of his direct relatives. We see Rahab, who was a prostitute. She becomes part of the line. We see Ruth, who's a Moabite woman, and they're told not to marry Moabites. What does that tell us? Not that we should go around breaking the law, but maybe this is the message that I kind of want to leave you with. There's an incident when Jesus and his disciples are out walking on the Sabbath, and they're hungry. In Israel, when we were there, we went to one of the tallest hotel in the country. We had a business meeting on Shabbat, right? Well, on Shabbat, the restaurant stays open. They have workers, waiters and waitresses and cooks and everything, but you can't get a hot meal because cooking a hot meal would be work. And the law says we don't work. Well, those people are working. I mean, you have people staffing the restaurant. You let them work. You're not following the law. What's the point of saying no hot meal, but I'll make you a sandwich, right? You want that? I'll make it. And I can open up this bag of chips, even though, so you know, there's fact and sort of fiction when it comes to the law. And they're really good at manipulating the law when they want to and holding fast to it when they don't want to.
And so are we.
And so are we. But these laws have a purpose. This is not a thing that we want to abandon, but we do see that there are times where this is what was intended. And God is not bound by that. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the right thing. We shouldn't follow laws in our country. But, so when Jesus and his disciples are walking on the Sabbath and they're hungry, they take heads of grain and they rub them in their hands to knock off the outer casing, and they start eating the grains. And the religious leaders say, hey, you're breaking the law, right? And do you remember Jesus' response to that? He says, Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is there to serve man. The law is there to serve man. Follow the law, and we get along a lot better. Follow the law, and this life more abundant is a lot more likely, isn't it? But it doesn't mean that you can use the law to hang somebody out to dry. It doesn't mean that you can use the law as a way of saying, I get to keep this woman's property. And kick her to the curb. That's not the intent of the law. It never was. And so we see things like this, they should be a clue to us. The law was there to serve man. That is.
Yeah.
Okay, you got it.
I love how that last thing with,
Yeah.
matter of fact.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the end of Ruth. We're going to look at Esther, just to give you an idea. We're, 1,100 years before Christ was born. We're going to move up 500 years to about 400 BC when Esther was born, or Esther lived.
It's another one of those stories that you see someone put in a predicament that we sometimes get put in, where you have to make a hard choice, and to do it involves risk. It involves you stepping out on a limb. It's another good story. We'll start that next week. God, we walk that line between justice and mercy, between the law and your law. The fact that you showed us that you love us even though we don't deserve it. And yet we like to cling to the law when we want to justify not forgiving, not accepting someone else. My prayer on this is that you remind us from this study, you remind us that we're here as your hands. We're here to carry out the intent of the laws, and the law is a beautiful thing. Remind us of that. We have opportunities. You send people to our lives, you send people right in front of us, and we find it too easy to dismiss them. We pray for the people in this country when there's a storm coming in this community, and we're able to put out of our minds when the same storm goes across Mexico. And those people, a lot of them have such lower resources, inability to withstand it. And we don't even think to pray. We don't even think to remember them as your children who you love. Bring that lesson to us. Bring that remembrance to us. And the fact that through faith, you accept all your children. Amen.
Well, thank you guys. For those of you who are down here, be safe, and let us know if we have phone service, if we can talk to each other. Let us know that too.
Cheryl, it's really good to see your living room.
She said she's off camera today.
I know that. I'm so happy that you're feeling better. I guess we didn't announce that, but Cheryl, that bout of COVID that we dreaded so much, she's doing well. And Julie and Bob, where are you?
They're driving back from Arkansas.
Yeah, driving back. Now we're in Oklahoma and headed to spend some time with some friends in Bells, Texas.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, they're going from Arkansas to Bell, Texas. They're
Are you still in Arkansas?
We just left Arkansas. Now we're in Oklahoma.
We spent the majority of our time in Illinois. We spent a week and a half in Illinois with
I was going to ask you if you happen to go through Toadsuck, Arkansas. When we were there, there's a place. All right, I didn't take a picture. I didn't think. I was going to tell you, snap me a photo of the city limit sign. It really is called Toadsuck, Arkansas. But it's too late for that.
Too
There
funny.
you go.
Well,
Hey,
y'all will be
Sharon,
in our
safe, and
prayers.
let me know about your parents.
Y'all be
They're
safe.
just leaving
Okay.
finally.
Okay, we'll be thinking
Okay.
about them. Safe travels for Jack.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I don't think so, but she might have gone.
Who was that?